Derek's fingers drummed impatiently on the steering wheel as he drove through the streets of his suburban neighborhood. The setting sun cast long shadows across the neatly manicured lawns, creating a picturesque scene that belied the tension simmering beneath the surface of his outwardly perfect life. He pulled into the driveway of his charming two-story home. Derek took a deep breath, trying to calm himself for what awaited him inside. He loved Talia, his wife of 8 years, but her mother Clara's constant presence in their lives had become an increasingly heavy burden. The porch light flickered on as he approached the front door, key in hand, before he could insert it. The door swung open, revealing Talia's radiant smile. "You're home early," she said, reaching up to plant a quick kiss on his cheek. Derek forced a smile, his shoulders relaxing slightly at his wife's warm welcome. He replied, "I managed to wrap up the Henderson account sooner than expected." He went into the foyer and hung his coat on the rack. The familiar scent of Talia's signature lasagna wafted from the kitchen, but it was overshadowed by another more potent aroma, Clara's clawing perfume. Derek's jaw clenched involuntarily. "Mom's here," Tal said. Her voice was tinged with a mix of excitement and apprehension. She knew how her husband felt about her mother's frequent visits. Derek nodded, his expression neutral. "Of course she is," he muttered under his breath, as they made their way towards the kitchen. The sound of Clara's boisterous laughter echoed through the house. Derek paused at the threshold, watching as his mother in. Derek was at their dining table, enjoying a glass of red wine. Clara's eyes lit up as she spotted him. "Derek, darling, it's so good to see you," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Hello, Clara," Derek replied, forcing himself to cross the room and plant a kiss on her cheek, and the smell of perfume made him want to gag. Talia was busy at the stove, her back to the room, stirring the sauce. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes, she called over her shoulder. Derek nodded, grateful for the break. "I'll just go freshen up," he said, eager to escape the stuffy atmosphere of the kitchen as he climbed the stairs to the second floor. Derek could hear Clara's voice, low and conspiratorial, followed by Talia's muffled giggle. His fists clenched at his sides, he felt a familiar mixture of frustration and helplessness wash over him. Back in their bedroom, Derek loosened his tie and flopped down on the edge of the bed. He loved Talia with all his heart, but Clara's constant meddling was slowly eroding the foundation of their marriage. How much longer could he put up with her domineering presence in their lives? He let out a heavy sigh. Derek got up and went to the bathroom. He splashed cold water on his face and looked at himself in the mirror. He looked older and more tired than his 38 years would suggest. Dark circles under his eyes showed that he hadn't been getting enough sleep. About his relationship with Talia, as he dried his face and hands, he decided to make an effort tonight for Talia's sake. He would try to get along with Clara, despite her presence. As he was descending the stairs, Derek paused. He heard hushed voices coming from the living room. The way they spoke made him hesitate. His hand was frozen on the banister. "Talia, how did you like the dark dick I arranged for you last night?" Clara's voice was usually so carefully modulated, but it was thick with barely suppressed glee. Derek's blood ran cold. Surely he had misheard this. This couldn't be happening. But then Derek's heart sank as he realized there was no way this could be a misunderstanding. "Mom, it was awesome. I want more," Talia said. Derek gripped the banister so tightly his knuckles turned white, fighting to remain upright, as waves of nausea and disbelief crashed over him. For a moment, all he could hear was the thunder. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Then, as if in slow motion, he found himself moving down the remaining steps and into the living room. Talia and Clara were sitting on the sofa, their heads together in a conspiratorial intimacy. At the sound of his footsteps, they looked up, and their expressions morphed from excitement. They were horrified to see Derek there. Talia gasped, and her face drained of color. Clara, ever the composed matriarch, recovered more quickly. "Derek, darling, how long have you been standing there?" she asked, in a casual tone, as if she hadn't just been discussing. Talia's daughter's infidelity ignited a white-hot fury in Derek's chest, long enough that he ground out his voice low and dangerous. Talia jumped to her feet, her eyes wide with panic. "Derek, it's not what you think. Not what I think. I think I should wait until I hear more before I make up my mind." Clara stood, placing a hand on Talia's trembling shoulder. "Let's not jump to conclusions," she said. "I'm sure if we all just sit down and talk about this, we'll find out what's going on." Derek was beyond explanations. He was beyond anything. He was beyond words. He was beyond anything. He was beyond everything. He was beyond anything. He was beyond explanations. He was beyond anything. He was beyond everything. He was beyond words. He was beyond explanations. He was beyond anything. He was beyond everything. He was beyond words. He was beyond explanations. He was beyond anything. He was beyond everything. He was beyond words. He was beyond explanations. He was beyond anything. He was beyond everything. He was beyond words. He was beyond explanations. He was beyond anything. He was beyond everything. He was beyond words. He was beyond explanations. He was beyond anything. He was beyond everything. He was beyond words. He was beyond explanations. He was beyond anything. He was beyond everything. He was beyond words. He was beyond explanations. He was beyond anything. He was beyond everything. He was beyond words. He was beyond explanations. Derek left through the front door. Talia's voice was choked with sobs. "Please don't go." Derek paused at the threshold, his hand on the doorknob for a moment. Tal's heart leapt with hope, but when Derek turned back to face them, his eyes were cold, and his expression set in stone. "I need some air." He said it in an eerily calm voice. "Don't wait up." The door slammed behind him with a finality that echoed through the suddenly silent house. Talia collapsed onto the sofa, her body racked with sobs. Clara stood frozen for once, at a loss for words. Outside, Derek stumbled to his car, fumbling with the keys as he struggled to control the tremors. He needed to get away to think and process the devastating revelation that had just shattered his world. As he peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching against the asphalt, Derek's mind raced. How long had this been going on? How many times had Talia betrayed him and Clara, his own mother? Derek drove aimlessly, his mind racing as he tried to process the news. His daughter had been unfaithful, and it seemed like her mother was orchestrating it. The streets blurred past as he drove, and he felt a growing anger. Was it justice he wanted, or revenge? In his chest, hours passed. The night grew longer as Derek drove around the neighborhood, unable to bring himself to return home. The thought of facing Talia and Clara, of hearing their excuses and justifications, made him physically ill. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten in the east, Derek found himself parked in front of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. He'd been driving around for hours, trying to think straight. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. His mind was too consumed with replaying the conversation he'd overheard and its implications. Stepping into the fluorescent light of the diner, he slid into a booth near the back. A tired-looking waitress approached, notepad in hand. He managed to croak out his order, his voice rough from disuse. As the steaming mug was placed before him, Derek stared into its depths, hoping the answers would be revealed in the swirling liquid. What was he supposed to do now? How could he ever look at Talia the same way again? The betrayal cut deep, not just because of the infidelity, but because of the casual way Talia and Clara had discussed it. As if it were Derek realized that Talia's actions were nothing more than a fun little secret, rather than the destruction of a marriage. His phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He pulled it out to find a barrage of calls and text messages from Talia. "Please come home. We need to talk. I'm so sorry. Derek, let me explain. I love you. Please don't throw everything away." His thumb hovered over the delete button. He was tempted to erase every trace of her from his life, but something held him back. A small traitorous part of him still loved her, or still wanted to believe there might be an explanation that could make this right. But as the hours ticked by, and the diner began to fill with a morning crowd, Derek knew there was no going back. The trust that had been the foundation of their marriage was over. He couldn't confront them now, not when things were still so raw. He needed time to think and plan his next move. Talia and Clara thought they could play him for a fool, but they were wrong. As he drained the last of his coffee, a plan began to form in Derek's mind. He wouldn't confront them directly, not yet. Instead, he would gather evidence and build an ironclad case that they couldn't deny or explain away. He would gather evidence and build a strong case that they couldn't deny or explain away. With a renewed purpose, Derek left the diner and headed back towards the house he once called home. He would play along, pretending everything was normal, while he set his plan in motion. When the time was right, he would expose their betrayal for all to see. As he pulled into the driveway, he felt a surge of determination. He took a deep breath and steeled himself for the performance of a lifetime. He would smile, accept their apologies, and pretend to move past this while plotting his ultimate revenge. The front door opened before he could reach for his keys. Talia stood there, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy, her hair a disheveled mess. For a moment, Derek's resolve wavered. The sight of her obvious distress, but then the memory of her excited voice, "Mom, it was awesome, I want more," hardened his heart once more. Talia breathed relief, evident in her voice. "I was so worried, where have you been?" He forced a tight smile. "I needed some time to think," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Can we talk?" Talia nodded eagerly, stepping aside to let him enter as Derek crossed the threshold. He caught sight of Clara hovering anxiously in the background. The sight of her made his blood boil, but he maintained his composure. He added, his eyes never leaving Tala's face. Clara opened her mouth as if to protest, but Tala silenced her with a look. "Of course," she said softly. "Mom, could you give us some privacy?" Clara retreated upstairs, leaving Derek and Tala alone. In the living room, the very room where just hours ago his world had come crashing down around him, Talia perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Derek, I'm so sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "What you heard is not what you think." Derek sat in the armchair across from her, his posture rigid. "Talia," he said, his voice calm on the surface but deceptively so. "Explain it to me." Talia flinched at his words, tears welling. Up in her eyes, "It's not like that." She insisted that she and her mother were just joking around. "It was stupid," she said, "but it didn't mean anything." The lie was so blatant and poorly constructed that Derek almost laughed. Did she really think he was that gullible? "A joke," he repeated. Talia nodded eagerly, her eyes lighting up. "It was just silly girl talk," she said. "You know how Mom can be sometimes, always pushing boundaries." "I should have shut it down," she continued. "I know that now. But I swear, Derek, I've never been unfaithful to you." Derek was tempted to call her bluff and demand the truth, but he decided against it. He needed more than just an overheard conversation to expose their deceit. Instead, he let out a long, weary sigh. "I want to believe you, Talia," he said, infusing his voice with just the right amount of uncertainty. "But you have to understand how this looks from my perspective." Talia nodded vigorously, tears streaming down her cheeks. I do understand, and I'm so sorry for putting you through this. It will never happen again. I promise. Please, Derek, can you forgive me?" Talia's face showed her disbelief. She knew it was going to take time to rebuild trust. Talia practically lunged across the space between them, throwing her arms around Derek's neck. "Thank you," she sobbed into his shoulder. "I love you so much. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Whatever it takes to make this right," he thought, as he returned her embrace. His mind was already racing ahead. He had bought himself the time and access he needed. Now the real work would begin over the next few days. Derek played the part of the wounded but forgiving. He was the perfect husband, distant but not cold, hurt but willing to work things out. All the while, he was laying the groundwork for his plan. Under the guys' noses, Derek purchased a series of small, high-quality cameras and microphones. He spent hours researching the best places to hide them, ensuring they would capture every incriminating word and action without being detected. A week after the fateful night, Derek put his plan into action. While Talia was out running errands and Clara was mercifully absent, Derek placed cameras in the living room, bedroom, and kitchen, and microphones in strategic locations to capture even the faintest whisper. As he worked, his resolve hardened. He would uncover the full extent of their betrayal, no matter how painful the truth might be. When he had irrefutable evidence, he would expose them both for the liars and cheaters they were. With the last device in place, Derek surveyed his handiwork. To the untrained eye, nothing in the house appeared different. But now, every corner of their once, Derek allowed himself a grim smile as he heard Tal's car pull into the driveway. He had them under constant surveillance. He thought to himself, let the show begin. Talia and Clara had no idea that their every move and word would now be recorded. He was building a case that would ultimately lead to their downfall. The stage was set. All that remained was for the actresses to play their parts. Derek sat in the darkened home office, eyes fixed on the multiple screens in front of him. Each display showed a different room in the house, silent witnesses to his shattered life. He leaned forward, adjusting the volume on one of the monitors as Talia's voice filtered through. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Derek's been so distant lately. I think he suspects something. Clara's laugh rang out sharp and dismissive. Oh, come on, you're being paranoid. Men are oblivious creatures. Besides, what's he going to do? Leave you? Derek's jaw clenched and his fingers dug into the armrests of his chair. The casual way they discussed their deception made he was furious, but he forced himself to remain calm and to keep watching and listening. Every word, every laugh, every secret glance was another nail in the coffin of his marriage. Over the next few days, Derek found himself living a double life. On the surface, he played the role of the dutiful husband, going through the motions of daily life with mechanical precision. But behind the scenes, Derek's mind was racing as he processed the information from his hidden cameras and microphones. One evening, as he prepared dinner in the kitchen, Talia approached him. She was hesitant, so she spoke softly, laying a hand on his arm. I was thinking maybe we could go out this weekend, she said. It's been a while since we had a date. That night, Derek tensed at her touch, but managed to keep his voice neutral. He was sure that sounded nice. Where did you have in mind? Talia's face lit up. Oh, I don't know. Maybe that new Italian place downtown. I've heard great things about it. Sounds perfect, Derek replied, forcing a smile as Talia leaned in to kiss his cheek. He had to suppress a shudder. How many times had she? Later that night, Talia slept soundly beside him after kissing him like this after being with another man. Dirk slipped out of bed and made his way to the office. He put on his headphones and began reviewing the day's footage. His heart sank as he watched Talia on the phone. Her voice was low and excited. I can't wait to see you again, she whispered into the receiver. I'll tell Derek I'm going shopping with Mum. He never questions that. Derek's hands clenched into fists, his nails digging painfully into his palms. The betrayal cut deep, each new revelation like a knife twisting in his gut. But he couldn't confront her. Not yet. He needed more, needed to understand the full extent of their deception. As the days turned into weeks, he found himself becoming increasingly withdrawn. His friends at work noticed the change. They gave him concerned looks as he moved through the office like a ghost. Hey man, you okay? His colleague Mike asked one afternoon. Yeah, I've just got a lot on my mind. It's work stuff. Mike nodded, though he was still a bit suspicious. Derek's eyes remained skeptical. Well, if you need to talk or grab a beer or something, just let me know. Thanks. I appreciate that. He knew he'd never take Mike up on the offer. How could he possibly explain the hell he was living through at home? The tension continued to build. Clara's visits became more frequent, and Derek found himself struggling to maintain his composure. He kept his cool around her, even when she smiled at him or called him darling in that Sakaran voice. He wanted to scream the truth in her face one Sunday afternoon. He was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book, when Clara came in with shopping bags. Derek, be a dear and help me with these, she called out. Derek rose, gave her a quick look, and took the bags from her. Clara's hand brushed against his, and he had to fight the urge to recoil. You know, Derek, Clara said, her voice dripping with false concern. I've noticed you've been a bit off lately. Is everything all right between you and Talia? Derek met her gaze, searching for any hint of. He felt no guilt or remorse. Everything was fine. Clara was just busy with work. Clara gave a little cluck of disapproval. Don't let that get in the way of your marriage. Talia needs attention. You know, a woman has needs. Derek felt a rising feeling in his throat, but managed to keep his voice steady. I'll keep that in mind, Clara. Derek thanked Clara for her concern as she sauntered away, satisfied with her meddling. He retreated to his office and watched the footage from earlier that day, seeing Clara and Talia huddled together in the kitchen, giggling like schoolgirls. Oh, Mom, you should have seen him, Talia gushed, her eyes sparkling. He was incredible. I never felt so alive. Clara replied, I told you a little variety is the spice of life. She was clearly pleased with herself. I told you, Derek, a little variety is the spice of life. What he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. Dirk slammed his fist on the desk, the pain barely registering through his rage. How could they be so callous, so utterly devoid of remorse, as the days wore on? Derek found himself becoming increasingly obsessed with the video. The evidence he was gathering took hours each night to review. He cataloged each betrayal and lie, and the weight of his knowledge was crushing. He couldn't stop, though. He needed to understand every facet of their deception. One evening, as Derek sat hunched over his computer, he was piecing together yet another damning video compilation, A knock at the office door startled him. Derek, Talia's voice called out, "Can I come in quickly?" Derek minimized the video editing software and called back. "Just a second." He took a deep breath and composed himself before opening the door. Talia stood there, her brow furrowed with concern. "Hey, I was wondering if we could chat. You've been spending so much time in here lately, I feel like I hardly see you anymore." Derek stepped aside, allowing her into the room. "Sure, what's on your mind?" Talia perched on the edge of the desk, her eyes searching his face. "Did I do something to upset you?" The irony of her question was almost too much to bear. Derek had to turn away, afraid his eyes might betray the turmoil raging within him. "No, Talia, you haven't done anything wrong," he heard her say. "I was starting to think the worst. Derek, I just want you to know that I love you. You can talk to me about anything, okay?" Derek nodded, not trusting himself to speak as Talia left the room and closed the door softly behind her. He slumped into his chair, the weight of her lies spoken so convincingly threatening to crush him. Instead of breaking, this only made him more determined. He turned back to his computer and threw himself into his work with renewed energy. He would expose their deceit, no matter the cost. As the week of recordings came to an end, Derek found himself with hours upon hours of incriminating footage. He spent an entire sleepless night working on it. He edited it all together, carefully selecting the most damning clips and the most hurtful conversations. He added captions to highlight particularly egregious moments and underscored it all with a haunting, melancholic score. The result was a devastating exposé of betrayal and deceit. As Derek watched the final cut, he felt a strange mix of vindication and despair. This was the weapon that would bring their whole charade crashing down. He picked up his phone and began composing a group text to their friends and family. Hey everyone, I hope you can make it to dinner on Saturday. It's been too long since we've all gotten together. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure you are too. I'll let you know the details soon. I'll see you there." While preparing appetizers, she turned to Derek with a smile. "I'm really excited for tonight. It'll be great to have everyone here, don't you think?" Derek nodded and forced a smile. "Yeah, it'll be great." Talia paused and studied his face. "Are you sure you're okay with this? You seem so preoccupied lately." "I'm fine," he replied. Derek told her that the thought of work made him feel like he was tasting a bitter lie on his tongue. Talia seemed satisfied with his answer, turning back to her preparations as Derek watched her work humming softly to herself. He felt a pang of regret, but then he remembered the countless over the past week. He had seen a lot of betrayals, but as evening fell and guests began to arrive, his resolve hardened once more. He found himself slipping into the role of gracious host with surprising ease, greeting friends and family members warmly, and accepting hugs and handshakes with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Clara arrived fashionably late, sweeping into the house like a queen holding court. "Derek," she exclaimed, air kissing his cheeks, "what a lovely idea, this little Suarez. It's been far too long since we've all been together like this." Derek's smile was brittle as he replied, "Yes, it certainly has been. Clara, I'm really happy you can make it." As the evening went on, Derek found himself watching the clock, his heart racing as the moment of truth drew nearer. He chatted with their friends, laughed at the right moments, and refilled drinks with mechanical precision. All the while, his mind was focused on that Derek had a laptop hidden away in his office, loaded with a video that would change everything. Finally, as the main course was cleared away and people settled in with their drinks, Derek knew it was time. He excused himself, slipping away to retrieve the laptop and the portable projector he had set up earlier when he returned. As the conversations died down in the living room, curious eyes turned to him. Talia looked puzzled, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Derek, what's going on?" He started the presentation by dimming the lights and hitting play. He fixed his eyes on Talia and Clara as the first image flickered to life on the wall. The room fell silent as Clara's voice filled the air, crystal clear and unmistakable. "Talia, how did you like the Dickie arranged for you last night?" And people were really shocked. Derek saw the color drain from Talia's face and her eyes get really wide with horror. Clara was frozen and her usual poise was shattered as the video kept going, showing clip after clip. The atmosphere in the room went from shock to outrage. Friends who had moments ago been laughing and chatting now sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between the screen and the two women at the center of the scandal. Derek stood tall, his voice steady as he addressed the room. "This is what happens when trust is broken. You've both betrayed me in the most In an unforgivable way, Talia, her face streaked with tears, stumbled to her feet. "Derek, please," she sobbed. "It's not what we meant." But Derek cut her off. His voice was cold. "Save it, Talia. I've heard enough of your lies." As the final clip faded to black, the room erupted into chaos. People began talking all at once, expressing. Others were disgusted and demanded explanations. But Derek remained calm. He was like a rock in the storm of emotions swirling around him. Clara, who had been so composed, burst into tears. "How could you do this?" she wailed, her eyes streaked with mascara. "We're family." Derek turned to her, his eyes hard. "Family. Clara, you were the one who orchestrated this whole thing. You're just as guilty as Talia." As guests began to leave, murmuring apologies and avoiding eye contact, Derek felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had done it. He had exposed their lies and betrayal for all to see. Talia was racked with sobs. "Derek, please, we can get through this. I love you." But Derek shook his head. "No, Talia. I'm filing for divorce." He stepped outside, took a deep breath of the cool night air. He felt a sense of liberation. Despite the pain that still throbbed in his chest, he knew the road ahead would be challenging. But as he looked up at the stars twinkling in the vast sky, he felt a glimmer of hope. He had reclaimed his life from the web of lies and deceit that had entangled him. While the journey to healing would be long, he was determined to face it head on. He knew it would be a long road, but he was determined to face it head on, free from the weight of betrayal that had burdened him for so long. As he stood there contemplating the future that lay before him, Derek made a silent vow to himself. He would never allow anyone to manipulate or betray him again. The trust he had lost might never be fully regained, but he would use this experience to build a stronger, more authentic life for himself. He knew he'd be able to get his life back on track, but he was determined to use this experience to build a stronger, more authentic life for himself. As he walked away from the house that had once been his home, he felt a sense of relief. The evening of the dinner party arrived, and Derek found himself in a calm, almost surreal state. He moved through the house with practiced ease, arranging flowers, adjusting place settings, and ensuring everything was perfect for the guests and for the show he was about to put on. As the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the first guests, Derek took a deep breath. He opened the door, a warm smile on his face. "Mike, Sarah, so glad you could make it," he said, ushering them inside. Mike clapped him on the shoulder and said, "I wouldn't miss it, buddy. It's been too long since we all got together like this." If only they knew. Derek tried to keep up the pretense as more guests arrived, filling the house with chatter and laughter. Derek mingled with them, playing the part of the perfect host, while keeping a close eye on the clock, counting down to the moment of truth. Talia flitted about, radiant in a new dress, unaware of the storm was about to break. She caught Derek's eye across the room and smiled, raising her glass in a silent toast. He returned the gesture, his stomach churning with a mix of anticipation and dread. Clara made her grand entrance, fashionably late as always. "Derek, darling," she exclaimed, air kissing his cheeks. "Lovely gathering, Derek. You've really outdone yourself." Derek forced a smile and thanked Clara for joining them, but he brushed off their worries with practiced ease. "Derek, you seem a bit distracted," his friend Tom observed during a lull in a conversation. "Everything okay?" "Never better," Derek replied, offering a reassuring smile. "Nothing to worry about," Tom said, as the main course plates were cleared away. Derek felt a surge of adrenaline. He got a rush of adrenaline and excused himself, slipping away to get the laptop and projector he'd prepared earlier. When he returned to the dining room, the conversations died down as curious eyes turned to him. Talia looked puzzled, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What's going on?" she asked. He announced that he had a special surprise for everyone. Despite the turmoil within, he had a presentation to give. He dimmed the lights and hit play, his eyes fixed on Talia and Clara as the first image flickered to life on the wall. The room fell silent as Talia's voice was loud and clear. "Talia, what did you think of the dark material I arranged for you last night?" Talia's face went pale. Her eyes were wide with shock. Clara sat frozen. Her usual poise was shattered. He met her gaze, his eyes cold. "This, Talia, is the truth you've been hiding from me and from all of us." As the video continued, showcasing clip after damning clip, the atmosphere in the room shifted from shock to outrage. Friends who had moments ago been laughing and chatting were now sad and stunned. They sat in silence, their eyes darting between the screen and the two women at the center of the scandal, Sarah whispered. "Oh my God!" Her hand covered her mouth. "Talia, how could you?" Mike shook his head in disbelief. "Derek, man, I had no idea. This is what happens when trust is broken. You've both..." Talia, her face streaked with tears, stumbled to her feet. "Derek, please," she sobbed. "It's not what it looks like. We can explain." Derek cut her off. "I've heard enough of your lies," he said. "We all have." Clara, her carefully constructed facade crumbling, burst into tears. "How could you?" she wailed. "Do this," she wailed, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "We're family." Derek turned to her. "Your actions are unacceptable. Clara, you orchestrated this whole thing. You're just as guilty as Talia." As the final clip faded to black, the room erupted into chaos. People began talking all at once, expressing disgust and demanding explanations. Tom said, shaking his head, "I can't believe this. Talia, Clara, how could you do this to DK and to all of us?" Sarah stood up, her face a mask of fury. "You disgust me. Both of you, we've been friends for years and this is how you behave." Talia, her body racked with sobs, reached out to Derek one last time. "Derek, please. We can get through this. I love you. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. Please give me another chance." But Derek stepped back, shaking his head. "No, Talia, we can't. I'm filing for divorce." The words hung in the air, final and devastating. Talia collapsed into a chair, her cries echoing through the now silent room. Clara, her face a mask of everyone, was shocked and ashamed. They tried to salvage the situation. "Let's all calm down," she said. Her voice was wavering. "I'm sure if we just talk this through, there's nothing to talk about." Derek interrupted. "You've both shown your true colors. There's no coming back from this." Guests began to leave. They were murmuring apologies and avoiding eye contact. Dirk looked up and saw that Mike was making eye contact with him. He felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. He had done it. He had exposed their lies and betrayal for all to see. Mike paused at the door and laid a hand on Dirk's shoulder. "If you need anything, man, you call me, okay?" Dirk nodded, grateful for the support. "Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it," he said, as the last guest left. They left, leaving Derek alone with Talia and Clara. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Talia, her makeup smeared and her eyes red-rimmed, made one last desperate attempt. "Derek, please," she begged. Her voice was hoarse from crying. "I know I made a terrible mistake, but our marriage means everything to me. We can go to counseling and work through this together, please." Derek looked at her, really looked at her, searching for any trace of the woman he had fallen in love with. But all he saw was a stranger, someone capable of lying to his face day after day. "Our marriage meant everything to me too," Talia said, her voice laden with pain and disappointment. "You and Clara both destroyed it." Clara, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "Derek, you have to understand. We never meant to hurt you. It was just a bit of fun, a way to liven things up. Surely you can see that." Derek's laugh was hollow, devoid of any humor. "A bit of fun? That's what you call betraying your son. You're arranging for your daughter to cheat on her husband. You're delusional, Clara." Talia reached out, trying to take Derek's hand, but he pulled away. "Derek, please, I'll do anything. Just tell me what I need to do to make this right." For a moment, Derek allowed himself to imagine a world where he could forgive them, where they could move past this betrayal. But as he looked at Talisa's tear-stained face and Clara's desperate eyes, he knew it was impossible. The trust. "It's over. I want you both out of my house by tomorrow evening. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings." Talia gasped. Her hand flew to her chest. "You can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go?" Dirk's eyes hardened. "That's not my problem anymore. Clara, you should have thought about the consequences before you decided to play games with people's lives." Talia lives as Tal sobs, renewed, and Clara sputters indignantly. Derek turned and walked away. He needed air, needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere of betrayal and shattered dreams. He stepped out onto the back porch and took in deep breaths of the cool night air. The stars twinkled overhead, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. As he stood there, Derek felt a strange mix of emotions washing over him. Pain, certainly, but also a sense of liberation. For weeks, he'd been carrying the weight of their betrayal, shouldering the burden of knowledge in silence. Now, with the truth laid bare, he felt lighter somehow. The road ahead would be challenging, he knew. He'd have to navigate divorce proceedings, divide assets, face friends and family in the aftermath of this scandal. But for the first time since overhearing that conversation, Derek felt like he could breathe again. He'd reclaimed his life from the web of lies and deceit that had entangled him. While the journey to healing would be long, he was determined to face it head-on, free from the weight of betrayal that had burdened him for so long. As he stood there contemplating the future that lay before him, Derek made a silent vow to himself. He would never allow anyone to manipulate or betray him again. The trust he had lost might never fully be regained, but he would use this experience to build a stronger Derek was ready for a more authentic life. He could hear Talia and Clara's muffled voices, no doubt plotting their next move. But Derek found that he no longer cared. They were part of his past, a chapter closing as a new one began. With one last look at the house that had once been his home, Derek turned and walked into the night. Each step took him further from his past and closer to a future of his own making. The path ahead was uncertain, but Derek felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. He had survived their betrayal, exposed their lies, and would now thrive, building a life free from deceit and manipulation. As he reached the end of the driveway, Derek paused, looking back at the house one last time. He whispered goodbye to Talia and Clara, and with those final words, stepped forward into his new life, leaving behind the shattered remains of his old one. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it. After all, he had already weathered the worst storm of his life. Whatever came next, he would face it with the strength and resilience he had discovered within himself. As he walked down the quiet suburban street, Derek felt a sense of peace settling over him. The future was uncertain, but it was his to shape. For the first time in a long time, he looked forward to what tomorrow might bring.